Hey people, welcome back to the channel. This is a story in which Naruto is a prodigy and is very similar to his father Minato. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the video. Leave a comment if you want to suggest fanfic. Check the description for credits and support the creator of the story. So let us begin. Chapter 23. A week passed after the good news, without anything interesting happening, except Tsunade officially becoming Hokage. Naruto had put his week off to good use to train and after that, started taking missions. In fact, he fully took advantage of the privileges that became available to him after his promotion to Jonin. He was allowed to take missions of higher rank, and after taking a bit of advice from Kakashi, who had experience in the young Jonin department, he started out with high C rank to mid B rank. So far, he had completed 5 missions, 1 each day, 2 high C rank, 2 mid B rank and 1 high B rank. The last one was actually supposed to be a mid B rank, guarding a wealthy wine merchant and his 2 friends in their journey from Konoha to the land of vegetables. Naruto was at first quite surprised that they made use of horse wagons. One was for the merchant and his friends, the other for their goods. The merchant was at first skeptical that there would only be one ninja to guard them, but Tsunade had convinced them that Naruto was more than qualified for this mission. Naruto sat on top of the second wagon in their journey. At halfway point, it seemed that this mission would be completed without any problem, and to Naruto's regret, any fight. However, as the saying goes, don't provoke the universe. It turned out that when they were about to enter No Kuni, they were ambushed by a ninja. More specifically, a missing nin. Amatsu Isshin was a high B rank missing nin from Kurigakure. Apparently, he had been hired to take out the merchant by a rival, or at least, that's what he said in his monologue when he was standing in front of the wagon. Poor guy never even saw Naruto coming, for the blonde's flash step was fast enough to catch Kakashi off guard. This guy stood no chance at all. He had just finished his monologue and moved to attack when his head was cleanly cut off from his body by Naruto using a kunai coated with wind chakra. Naruto had been ready to dispose of his body when he had paused, and took out his bingo book. He had smiled when he saw the missing nin's entry on a page for 120,000 ryo. Of course, his mission pay was relatively higher, and had been bumped up because of Isshin, but extra cash hurt no one. The client had been incredibly relieved and pleased, with him and his friends repeatedly thanking Naruto for saving their lives. Naruto had told them about the change in mission parameters, and the cost following it. Fortunately, they had offered no resistance against paying more. They wanted to repay him in any way they could, so Naruto just collected the extra money in payment. It had taken them a total of 38 hours to reach their destination. After getting their signature that the mission was complete and wishing them good luck in their endeavors, Naruto double-timed it back to the village, making just one stop at a bounty station to collect Isshin's bounty. Unfortunately, he could not use Hiraishin because his sensing capabilities were not good enough to cover countries just yet. On the bright side, he put his recent mastery of Kurama's fist tail to good use. After they had returned with Tsunade, Naruto used his week off to master Kurama's first tail. The blonde had, after a substantial amount of hard work, mastered the use of his body in the one-tailed mode. His already impressive strength, speed and reflexes were heightened greatly. It had taken him a mere 5 hours of journey to reach Konoha. After he had reported his success back to Tsunade and collected his money, he had went back to his house. His parents' house. That was another new development for him. After the day when he was told, he was called back into Tsunade's office, where she had advised him to move into his parents' house as soon as possible. After all, his apartment was hardly a place for him to live after his marriage. And knowing how Naruto tended to finish things rather quickly to avoid any backlog, she told him to move into the house the day after. At first, Naruto was a little puzzled because he really couldn't understand the reason he had to move his things so quickly. But Tsunade explained it to him that he had to have the house ready and furnished by the time Temari arrived. And by ready, she meant it was to be ready for Naruto and Temari to live in, not just him. Being the naive guy Naruto was, he didn't understand at what she was hinting. Naruto was a very simplistic guy, who really only had what he needed and nothing more. Of course, then he was introduced to shopping, his nightmare for the next few days. Day of the moving turns out, news like the kind of these had a way of spreading around the village very fast. Naruto had reluctantly agreed to Tsunade's suggestion of moving into his parents' house the very next day. Just as he was leaving the office after their discussion, Tsunade casually told him that they needed to do some work after he was done moving. The glint in her eyes when she said that actually managed to scare him. He had the whole next week off, including 2 days extra of the week after, because of him doing back-to-back B-rank missions the whole week and not taking the required leave. Which meant, he had the whole week to get the house ready for Temari's arrival. The next day, at 10 in the morning, he started packing after he had lazed around a little. With the help of his shadow clones, he finished packing everything within an hour. All his ninja-related supplies like shuriken, kunai, fuinjutsu scrolls, ninja wire went into one large sealing scroll, while his household supplies went into another large sealing scroll. When he had packed up, he looked around the apartment, feeling a small sense of sadness within him. A part of him didn't want to leave the small residence. This was actually the first thing that had really belonged to him, gifted to him by the old man. To leave it like this, even if it meant going to live in his parents' house, felt sad. He would be sure to acquire a fair price for it when he sold it later. He slung the scrolls and walked out of the apartment, closing the door. He took out a folded piece of paper from his pocket and pressed it on the ground, right in front of the door, so that the seals faced the ground. Pushing a little bit of chakra into it, a glow lit up the entire corridor, lighting all the seals present on the walls. Seals that were carved by him as a security measure for those who came after him. The piece of paper had the key to the sealing array in the corridor, to disable all the seals at once safely. Once the lights had receded, indicating all the seals were now gone, he crumpled up the paper and burnt it with a blazing palm. He looked around the place one last time, before flashing away. He arrived in the living room instantly. He put down the scrolls when one thing suddenly hit him. He had absolutely no idea what to do next. He was unsure if he should unpack or not, because the house already was furnished and maintained for almost 15 years. He could unpack his shinobi supplies, but what of the household supplies? He went to the only person who was capable of helping him. But first, a little insurance. Tsunade looked at Naruto with mild amusement as he narrated his problem. She honestly found it a little cute and adorable that Naruto, who seemed to have a solution for every problem, would be unsure in the face of matters of preparing the house for his bride. Then again, a man definitely can't do a woman's job. So will you help me? Naruto posed his question, standing in front of Tsunade. He knew that Tsunade was the only woman who could help him. She was the only one he trusted as well, aside from Shizune. Tsunade smirked as she leaned back in her chair, hands folded at her stomach. I could, but the Hokage's services come with a price, you know. Naruto internally groaned, but was half expecting this. After all, Tsunade would be a fool to not take advantage of him asking for her help. He sighed and took out a storage scroll from his pouch and laid it on her table, unsealing it. Tsunade's eyes widened as her eyes laid themselves on 3 very expensive, exotic bottles of sake. Her eyes shot to him in question, to which he shrugged. Don't ask me, I found them in my basement. Interestingly, he learned that his mother was quite a fan of exotic sake. He had a whole stash of his mother's sake in the basement. These 3 were only a little part of the whole that was very delicately preserved. His mother had damn fine sealing skills if she was able to preserve the whole stash like she did. The seals on the stash were personally made by her for storage purpose. Tsunade picked up a bottle and turned it around, whistling at the label. Well, your mother had good taste, she commented, then paused. She narrowed her eyes at him. How do I know that these haven't gone bad? Naruto replied easily, my mother created seals specifically for preserving them for a long time. Tsunade knew just how good Kushina was with fuinjutsu. If she was the one who created seals to preserve these precious babies, then she had no doubt these hadn't gone bad. She then had a devious thought, perhaps she could haggle for a bit more. Still, just 3 bottles for the service you are asking from me. Naruto narrowed his eyes. You very well know just how rare these are. In fact, I could have just said that I would owe you a favor, but that was too risky. I'm asking help for a bit of house decoration, mind you. Tsunade immediately raised her hands in surrender position. Just kidding, Naruto. I was just kidding. However, inside she was breathing a sigh of relief. Man, those eyes were unnerving. First things first, we need to get you access to your clan accounts, she said, standing up. We're going to the bank. What followed after was perhaps the most boring day in Naruto's short life. Tsunade had taken him to the bank, right after dumping the day's work on Shizune, and they had spent almost 4 hours going over statements, accounts etc. At the end of their work, both of them had been quite mentally exhausted, but had smiles on their faces. Turns out if you are an important person and being accompanied by the Hokage, your work gets over rather quickly. Naruto had finally been granted full access to his clan's accounts. And what accounts they were. The Namikaze account was by no means small, having a total of 300 million ryo. Naruto had first been baffled, for he had no idea just how his father had managed to acquire so much money. Namikaze had not been a clan before his father became the Hokage. The Uzumaki account, on the other hand, had simply left him with his mouth hanging open. The simply ridiculous amount of money had almost sent him into shock. The amount won't be mentioned, but it was enough that he could live another life without working, that too lavishly. Tsunade and Naruto were walking back to the Hokage Tower, the former with an exhausted smile on her face and the latter still gazing at the shiny, new account cards in his hands with awe and wonder. Tsunade looked at her fellow blonde and smirked. You still having trouble believing? Naruto nodded as he pocketed the cards. The Uzumaki clan I can believe, but I had, and still don't have, any idea just how was my father able to acquire so much money alone. Minato was an extremely clever and resourceful person, Naruto. Just leave it at that. The two walked in silence for a while, which was then broken by Naruto. He asked curiously, so, I thought that we were going to do something about redecorating my house. Why did we go to the bank? To his surprise, Tsunade laughed heartily. Oh Naruto. I sometimes forget that you are still a child and can't see the bigger picture sometimes. That comment earned a scowl from him. Tsunade completely ignored the scowl and smirked. The real fun begins tomorrow. We'll start at 9 in the morning. The feeling of doom Naruto had been feeling earlier returned with a vengeance. Next day of the moving Naruto had been sparring with 5 of his clones, completely on the defensive, in the massive ground behind his house. You might think that why would Naruto need to be on defensive against his own clones, but you would be wrong. Naruto was trying to avoid all their attacks, blindfolded. And he was only partially succeeding. He was trying to use everything but his eyesight to avoid the attacks. He was trying to hone his instincts to the highest level, trying to increase the precision of his danger sense. He avoided a roundhouse kick from a clone by ducking underneath, moving his left hand in a smooth motion to redirect the punch to his chin another way. He would have continued, but the seals on the outer gate informed him that someone was standing outside his house. He and his clones paused their fighting, dispelling themselves. He walked over to his towel and water, taking the bottle with him as he walked and wiping the sweat. He arrived at the gate and opened it, frowning in confusion when he saw Tsunade standing there. With Sakura, Ino and Tenten. He frowned in concern when he saw an expression of mirth on Sakura's face, followed by the absolutely savage smirk on Ino's and a friendly smile on Tenten's face. Have a nice morning, brat. Naruto immediately turned an annoyed face towards the busty cage. Yeah, it was going so fruitful, he said with light sarcasm. Tsunade, being a medic, immediately noticed the bruises forming on his arms. She curiously asked, what were you doing? Naruto vaguely answered. Training. She stepped forward, at least let me heal those bruises. Her hands lit up with green chakra, accelerating already fast healing process, thanks to Kurama. Sakura stepped forward, and her tone mimicked her expression of betrayal. So, Naruto, I heard something very interesting from Tsunade-sama. Naruto's sarcastic mutter of, did you now? Went unheard by the pink-haired girl. Ino was the next to pitch in. Yeah, that you are going to get married to the Princess of the Sand. Hearing Ino describe Temari like that made Naruto actually pause and think. Now that he thought about it, Temari was royalty, being the daughter of the Kazekage. This gave him the perfect comeback for Ino's comment. Well, a prince usually only marries a princess. That earned him a half-hearted swat on the head by Tsunade, and giggles from Sakura and Tenten. Ino tried to scowl as well, but even she chuckled in the end. She should have expected this, with Naruto being the son of the Yondaime, she mused. Naruto whispered to Tsunade so only she could hear. Not that I mind you healing me, why are you doing it? It usually vanishes in under 20 minutes. Tsunade muttered back, still concentrating on the fading bruises. I'm not doing it out of kindness, Gaki. I have need of you this day. She looked up with a slight grin. We are going to abuse you the whole day. She mentally laughed at Naruto's alarmed expression before stepping back. You know, she began, the village would know of your marriage anyway, so I decided that it best be on my terms. Naruto pointed an accusing finger at her. You told Ino, didn't you? The smirk of the female blondes gave him the answer. He shook his head. Anyway, why have you called them here? I thought you were the one going to help me. Tsunade put an arm around his shoulders and started leading him back into the house, with the genin following behind her. I did say that, but the work we are going to do today cannot be done by me alone, which is why I brought some help. Naruto deadpanned at her. Any particular reason your help consists of only girls? Tsunade nodded seriously, causing Naruto to double take. This seemed like a serious matter. We are going to completely refurbish this house of yours. Don't worry, she assured the mildly panicking blonde, we won't change the house completely. Just put some new things here and there, add a woman's touch that's very important, among other things. Oh, and leave something for Tamari to add if she wants to. Naruto opened the door to the house, allowing the others to walk inside. He and Tsunade walked ahead of others, who were marveling at the inside of the house. Ino's eyes fell on the portrait of Naruto's parents and she gasped in awe. Naruto, is that your mother? Naruto turned around and saw the three genin looking at the portrait of his parents. He smiled slightly in pride. Yeah. Isn't she beautiful? Sakura was the one who replied this time, gushing over. She's gorgeous. Tsunade lightly shoved Naruto upstairs. Get dressed fast. We have work to do today. As Naruto made his way upstairs, Tsunade walked and took a seat at the sofa. The three genin followed her example and sat down as well, with Tenten leaning forward in interest. You, Tsunade-sama, did you know about Naruto's parents? To the genin's surprise, the medic nin snorted. It surprises me how anyone didn't figure it out. I mean, he literally looks just like his father. She waved her hand, gesturing to the portrait. And it was true, as they had found out on the day of the finals. Naruto and his father could be clones, if Naruto was a little more grown up in height. Before they could think more on this, Naruto came downstairs, in his Jonin uniform. Let's get this over with, shall we? However, his confidence dimmed after looking at the glint in their eyes. Oh, what torture it was. 7 hours later, Naruto was looking around the inside of his house with a tiredness he had never felt before. He didn't have any energy left to do anything. As he tiredly collapsed on the sofa to get some of his energy to head to the bedroom and fall onto his bed, he recounted what he went through the day. Tsunade and the girls had taken full advantage of his ability to mass-produce shadow clones. Tsunade had taken him to get the latest kitchen accessories, while his clones had went with Ino, Sakura and Tenten to get new interior designs for the house. Tsunade also sent a clone of her own with them, just to make sure that whatever the girls selected didn't make the house too girly for Naruto's tastes. Naruto had protested that his house already had kitchen accessories, but Tsunade insisted he take it, if only as a wedding present from her. He was reluctant to buy it, but he did. To his enormous shock and surprise, his account, the Uzumaki account, barely had a dent in it after the purchases they had made, and not just for the kitchen. Tsunade had only laughed and said that Kushina didn't do anything in small amounts. They had returned home to find the three girls, with a group of men working extensively on the interior design of the house. After seeing Naruto, he was bewildered to see his own clones giving him looks of pain, followed by pity and then, to the extreme annoyance of Naruto, dispelling. Present boy, that day was a roller coaster for Naruto, with merciless teasing from Kurama. The extensive work that had been going on in his house had also been charged to his Uzumaki account. Seeing the ridiculous amount of money it contained, Naruto had little to no problem in using it to give his house a new look. He had been quite worried that Tsunade had given Ino and Sakura free rein over the designing of the house. However, Tsunade had assured him that she had picked Tenten just for the purpose so that Ino wouldn't completely make it look like that only a woman lived there. And judging from the arguments from Tenten and Ino he had heard, with Sakura acting as mediator, Naruto knew that Tsunade had hit the nail on the head when it came to Ino. He had a freakout when he saw what plans Ino had for the house and almost exploded when Tsunade claimed him down and told him that she would take over it from Ino, much to the girl's complaints, which were silenced by a stern look from the Hokage. Naruto watched as over the course of the next week, Tsunade completely transformed the house into something that was lavish and modern, but not too much that it lost the homely feeling that had been there before. Tsunade also made sure that Naruto added his own touches to the house, and left space for Temari, if she wanted to add something of her own. All in all, the house was ready well in time. All that was left was for Temari to come. Naruto finally snapped from the flashback and saw that he had arrived at his home. He flashed directly into his house, eager to do something to relax. He quickly took a shower and freshened up, wearing a t-shirt and a lower. He entered his father's study and sat down in the chair behind the beautiful, ornate desk. He traced his hand almost in remembrance, as if he could almost picture his father sitting on this desk, going over the ideas for Fuinjutsu. He leaned back, folding his hands behind his head and looking up in the ceiling, trying to decide on what to do. His father's study, which was his study now, had remained mostly untouched. Only the door that led into the room had been repainted. Otherwise, Naruto had strictly kept everyone from entering the room. He had redesigned the ceiling array completely before a war named Ino was dropped on his home. The password was only one, consisting of 3 kanji characters. But he had chosen 6 that looked almost alike, with minor differences in strokes. One time he had caught Ino attempting to open the study discreetly. She had thought she was alone, but apparently not. He had stopped her before she killed herself painfully, and very sternly reminded her to respect others' privacy, and keep away from the room. She had looked appropriately guilty, and promised not to investigate the door anymore. He absently grabbed a paper and a brush, dipping it in an ink pot and doodling some ideas on it. He had been told by Tsunade that Temari would be arriving tomorrow, so he was understandably tense. A few weeks ago, they were on the opposite sides of a war. Now, they were about to get married. Things were going to be a bit awkward, and he was not looking forward to it. He stood up, putting the brush away and crumpling the paper, burning it to ashes with a small fire. He was about to leave when something caught his eye on the shelf. More like, it was a book. A book he had never touched, for a reason he couldn't fathom. He took it off the shelf, eyebrows furrowing in confusion when he sensed a genjutsu placed on it. With a quick pulse of chakra, he shattered it. However, instead of immediately dispelling, like fog clearing away, it shattered like a glass, with chips of chakra diffusing into the air. Naruto watched with a small amount of awe. Genjutsu weren't meant to shatter like this. And why did this chakra feel so warm, so much like his own? He shook his head, making a quick note to investigate that later. He opened the book, reading the title. Enhancements with Sealing. Naruto muttered, before flipping the pages and raising eyebrows with incredulousness at seeing countless mathematical calculations, scientific diagrams of the body, with numerous sealing equations. He whispered to himself, what the hell is this? XXXXXXX. The next day found Naruto and Tsunade standing at the west gates of the village. Hiruzen was standing next to them as well. Naruto had to hand it to him. He was the oldest, living Kage alive who was now enjoying retirement. Hiruzen said that he was now more of a call-on advisor to Tsunade, if she ever needed help dealing with more difficult matters. We've been standing here for almost 20 minutes, Hokage-sama, Naruto said in boredom. Are you sure we aren't early? Tsunade twitched beside him. Even she was starting to get a bit impatient. She was never the one for tardiness. Maybe they ran into an obstacle on the way. Hiruzen laughed at seeing the interaction between both the blondes. It was quite entertaining. Anyways, I have something I need to talk to you and Ero Senin about, Ba-chan. The serious tone in his voice caused Tsunade to raise an eyebrow in surprise. What could be so serious that he needed her and Jiraiya's opinion on? Even Hiruzen was curious, but Naruto gave him an apologetic look. Sorry Gigi, but I can't tell you, because I need their professional opinions as a medical specialist and seal master. Hiruzen nodded in realization. That would explain him being left out. The three stood standing for 10 more minutes when Naruto announced. They're coming. Although for some reason, they are moving painfully slow. Tsunade looked at him in confusion. How the hell do you know? Naruto just gave her a look as if it was painfully obvious. I'm a censor. Didn't Ero Sennin tell you? Tsunade grit her teeth. I'm really gonna drill that pervert on the things he left out when telling me about you. Anyway, be very careful on how you speak with the Suna shinobi. You need to make a good first impression. Naruto smirked as he stared at the road ahead. I think I already made a first impression. Not sure if good or not. On the other end, the entourage from Sand was relieved as a whole when the gates of Konoha came into their view. As tradition said, the bride had to be escorted in a palanquin. Tamari was grumbling about her legs being cramped up from sitting for too long. She was not a delicate princess who needed to be pampered. She was a goddamn chunin of her village. Her thoughts took a melancholic turn as she looked at her reflection in one of the inside mirrors. From tomorrow, she was no longer going to be a shinobi of Suna, but rather of Konoha. She had been proud of wearing her village's headband, but no more. She would have to wear another village's shinobi. Proud. That's yet to be seen. Tamari. The call startled her out of her thoughts. She turned her head to see Gaara poking his head inside, an unusual frown on his face. She sadly smiled at that. She was still getting used to Gaara showing concern for her. What is it, Gaara? Are you alright? The question was so, out, coming from him, and yet, Tamari found it adorably cute. She smiled slightly as she held her brother's hand. He did not flinch. I will be, Gaara. Don't worry. Gaara looked extremely unsure of what to say next. For someone who had minimum social contact, that was to be expected. However, his next words were so sure that it caught Tamari off guard. Naruto will take good care of you, Tamari. He is the only one I trust to protect you. It still astounded Tamari and Kankuro just how high Gaara held Naruto. Then, again, Naruto had single-handedly turned Gaara's life around, so it was understandable, but putting so much trust in one person was simply mind-blowing. Thank you, Gaara. Wow. The quiet exclamation from Kankuro caught Tamari's attention as she frowned. What is it, Kankuro? Both the former and current Hokage are here to greet us, along with your fiancé. The entourage reached the gates finally. Tamari got out of the palanquin and came face to face with a very busty, blonde woman, alongside the god of shinobi, and her fiancé. Her heart skipped a beat on seeing him give a small smile in her direction. But she steeled herself. Time for talking with him would come later. She bowed to the woman. Hokage-sama, it is an honor to meet you, as well as Sandame-sama. Tsunade was formal in her reply as well. It is a pleasure to formally meet you. I am Senju Tsunade, Godime Hokage of Konohagakure no Sato. Naruto eyed Tamari appreciatively. She had changed her outfit to a long-sleeved purple blouse under a gray top, a dark blue skirt that reached her mid-thigh, showing off her legs, and a longer slash than the previous one. She carried her fan the same way as before as well, tucking it into her bow. Before Naruto could greet Tamari, all talking stopped suddenly when Gaara stepped forward, walking so as standing directly in front of Naruto. Naruto faced the redhead with a genuine smile, waiting for him to say whatever he wanted to say. However, it became clear to Naruto when the silence stretched into awkwardness that Gaara was still learning on how to interpret social cues. So Naruto initiated the conversation. How have you been, Gaara? I have been well, Uzumaki Naruto. However, I have a request to make of you. Naruto didn't even need to read minds to know what request Gaara needed to make. He put his hand on the redhead's shoulders, ignoring the gasps from some of the Suna shinobi. I promise that I will protect Tamari with my life, Gaara. This is the promise of a lifetime. That seemed to ease some tension from Gaara's shoulders. His next words were heartful. Thank you, Uzumaki Naruto. Naruto patted Gaara's shoulder once. Friends call each other by first names, Gaara. Just Naruto will suffice. Everyone was watching the interaction with different thoughts. The shinobi from Suna, except for Baki, seemed amazed that Naruto had talked to Gaara without showing an ounce of fear, and more, considered him a dear friend. Tsunade and Hiruzen were smiling, proud of Naruto's actions. They knew how tough a Jinchuriki's life was, Gaara's more than Naruto's, but it was very mature of him to actively break the ice with Gaara when no one wanted to. Temari was giving a thankful smile to her would-be husband, with Kenkuro's being more hidden. However, the puppet fighter didn't know why he automatically straightened up when Naruto glanced at him. He gulped when he saw the blonde approaching in his direction with a smirk on his face. He did not see Temari's amused expression when Naruto stood in front of him, staring down at him. Naruto was almost 5 feet 5 inches, while Kankuro was slow in the growing department and as such, stood at 4 feet 11 inches, much to his shame. So Naruto practically towered over him. Kankuro could feel sweat forming on his brow, but refused to break eye contact with the taller shinobi. Naruto then leaned forward so that his mouth was next to Kenkuro's ears. You better do something about your makeup. It easily gives away your nervous sweat. Kenkuro's eyebrows shot up in surprise. He didn't expect this of all things to come out of his soon-to-be brother-in-law. He didn't even know what to say, but Naruto had already moved on. Naruto stood in front of Temari, fighting the impulse to hug her right there and then. It would look very out of place, not to mention suspicious to those who didn't know of their earlier interactions. Instead, he greeted her warmly, "Welcome to Konoha, Temari." Temari smiled and greeted back. "I accept your welcoming, Naruto-san." Apparently, she was more aware of the protocols and way of conversations that were to be followed in this context. That was to be expected of the eldest daughter of the Kazekage though. It was then Tsunade stepped back into the conversation. "Now that the greetings are over, please follow me. I will make your arrangements of staying in our village." However, Naruto interjected. "Hokage-sama, if it's not too much trouble, I can take Temari and her siblings with me to my home. They can stay with me. I have more than enough room." Tsunade gave it a moment of thought and then agreed. It would give Naruto and Temari time to talk out whatever issues they have, as well as catch up. Also, it would prove a good bonding time between Naruto and Temari's brothers. "Alright, you can take them with you. But report to me early tomorrow for Temari's initiation." Naruto beamed in her direction and put each of his hands around Gaara and Temari, pulling them into his sides. He turned to face her and gave a charming smile. "By your leave, Hokage-sama." He then flashed out of there, leaving a blinking and confused Kankuro in front of an equally confused Tsunade. A few moments later, Naruto flashed back, grabbed Kankuro by his shoulder and flashed away again. All the people left there blinked at the unusual happenings, not knowing what sense to make out of it. Tsunade snapped out of her confusion when Hiruzen chuckled beside her at Naruto's antics. She turned to the rest of Suna Shinobi, "The rest of you, follow me. I will show you your staying arrangements." XXXXXXX Naruto appeared with Gaara and Temari right outside the gates that led into his home. Both of them blinked at the sudden travel, after which their minds caught up, followed by their bodies. Temari immediately turned and glared at a smirking Naruto, while Gaara deadpanned at him. "A warning would have been nice, you know," she almost growled at him. Naruto sheepishly rubbed the back of his head and chuckled. It was the first time someone ever complained about instantaneous travel. "Don't ever do that again," Gaara said in his deadpan. Naruto rose an eyebrow in return. "You mean to say you don't like traveling from one place to another in an instant?" The narrowing of eyes was the only answer that Gaara gave, but Naruto refrained from smirking in his silent victory at the argument. It was then Temari spoke up. "Wait, where's Kankuro?" Naruto's eyes widened for a second, before he disappeared in a flash, returning instantly with the aforementioned person. The puppet fighter turned and indignantly pointed a finger at Naruto. "You forgot about me." Naruto shrugged, "My bad." He then walked up to the gates and pressed his hand to let the seals recognize his chakra. The seals glowed and the gate opened up, giving everyone a view of the house inside. Gaara was impassive as ever, but Kankuro was gaping in wonder at the house. Temari also gazed in awe at the residence, but hers was less than her idiotic brother. She had known that with Naruto being the head to 2 clans, wealth was never a problem for him. Naruto smirked at their reactions and gestured with his hands. "Shall we head inside?" They all went inside the gates, and this time Temari couldn't conceal a gasp. The compound was even more beautiful, with a small square pond in front of the house. The house in question was quite big, easily big enough to be called a mansion. And the garden, with its healthy grass and flowers seemed to be well cared for. Naruto led them all inside, further surprising Temari and Kankuro. Gaara maintained his impassive look, but even he admitted to be impressed on the inside. The living room was very spacious and while looked very lavish, it still gave off a homey feeling. The kitchen also looked newly furbished, and was connected to the living room. Naruto walked into the center of the living room, right in front of the sofas and living room and clapped twice for attention. Alright, listen up. The three siblings turned to him, frowning in confusion. First order of business, I'm telling you where you're gonna sleep. He turned to Temari, who looked a bit anxious. His look softened and he said, Temari, while we may know each other, he ignored Gaara's raised eyebrow and Kankuro's sputters, I doubt you want us to sleep together. So we are going to be sleeping in separate rooms. Kankuro interrupted him. Wait, what about you and my sister? So here are the facts, Naruto continued as if the guy hadn't even spoken, there are a total of 3 bedrooms upstairs. The master bedroom, which is mine, is at the end of the corridor. There are 2 guest bedrooms, one of which will be Temari's. He turned to Gaara, you two either could bunk together or, Kankuro can have it. I don't sleep, Gaara stated. Naruto frowned, but shrugged. Have it your way then. Guess you are lucky, doll boy, you get to sleep in a bed instead of the couch. Kankuro sputtered again as Naruto kept on talking. He turned to Gaara and said, remind me to fix your seal one of these days. After everyone had been introduced to their rooms, Naruto called them down again and said, alright, now that the accommodations have been set, here's the thing. Either you can train in the grounds behind the house, or you can roam around Konoha with my clone as a guide to show you the hot spots. Kankuro asked accusingly. Why a clone? Naruto turned his face towards him with a raised eyebrow. I hope you don't mind, but I'd like to spend the day with my fiancé. That is, if she is willing, he asked her, to which she gave a small nod and walked up to him, poking his chest. We need to have a talk. We don't mind, Naruto. We will take your clone as a guide, Gaara said before Kankuro really started to grill Naruto. The talk his sister wanted to have sounded important. Just as he finished speaking, a clone popped up beside Naruto. Have fun, you two. With that, Naruto grabbed Temari and disappeared. XXXXXXX Naruto and Temari spent the rest of the day just roaming around, talking about just general things, getting to know each other better, or they went to a restaurant and had lunch, or trained. The day passed very quickly for both of them, and soon they found themselves sitting on the head of Naruto's father, overlooking the village. Naruto was leaning against a spike of hair, with Temari leaning into his right side, head rested on shoulder, with Naruto's arm wrapped around her shoulder. She had her fan rested against another spike nearby. Both of them were enjoying the peace and quiet. I could get used to this, Temari murmured, shifting so she was closer than before. Naruto was more than happy to let her. Yeah, me too. Silence reigned for a short while again, which was then broken by Naruto. Temari, do you think this could work? Temari lifted her head from Naruto's shoulder to look him in the eyes. She knew exactly what he was talking about, whether this marriage could work or not. She sighed. Naruto always seemed to go straight to the point, without beating around the bush. Not that she had a problem with that. To be honest, even I had this question on my mind ever since I was told about this, she told him, watching him nod in return. She began to blush as she spoke. I know that I liked you, spending time in your company. I had developed these feelings for you that I had never felt before, towards anyone. I like you, but I am unsure whether these feelings are enough to. She couldn't exactly find the words to express how she truly felt. Naruto just nodded, it's okay. I understand. Something like that is difficult to put into words. How about we talk this another way? Temari turned to him with a quizzical look. What do you mean? Naruto tilted his head to he was directly facing Temari. She was very close to him, the physical contact they had at the moment would have made him blush anytime, but the conversation was serious. You know, when I found out that we were supposed to be enemies, I just couldn't come to terms with that fact. My feelings were so strong for you that I almost couldn't make my mind up on what would I do if I were to face you in the war. Temari didn't say anything, just nodding him to continue. But her eyes were a bit blurrier than before. Naruto forced any hesitance back. He needed to get this out of his system. My feelings for you and duty to the village were in conflict. If I chose you, then my village would kill me. The village that was entrusted to me by my parents. Abandoning it meant spitting on what they did to protect me. A single tear flowed from Temari's right eye. What do you mean, entrusted, to you? Naruto's reply was monotonous. I'm the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi. That reply almost made Temari choke on her own spit. Naruto was the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi. How and when the hell did that happen? Then she remembered the conversations between her and Naruto before the invasion. Naruto had told her that the village had very few people that actually cared about him. No wonder Gaara held Naruto in such high regard, they could almost be brothers in suffering. Then she remembered something. The Yondaime had seemingly killed the Kyuubi years ago. But masses of chakra can't be killed, and Naruto just revealed that the Kyuubi was living inside him, which meant, "Oh Kami," she breathed out. This was too much news to be dealt with at one time. To think the Yondaime sealed the Kyuubi inside his own son. To protect the village, he sacrificed his own family. Tears were freely flowing out by now. Naruto was sugarcoating it when he said that he had been entrusted with the village. The Yondaime Hokage had sealed the fate of his own son by making him the Kyuubi's jailer. It was frightening how many similarities were popping up between Gaara and Naruto. Their father had sealed Shukaku into Gaara, trying to make him into a weapon. Naruto's father had done the same, except he had done so with a hope that Naruto would use the power to protect the village. Why? The word was whispered, because Temari was openly crying by now. A look full of concern came across Naruto's face as he pulled Temari into his lap. He gently grabbed her face with his hands and brushed off her tears with his thumbs, speaking in a slightly pleading tone. Please don't cry, Haim. I don't like it when you cry. Temari held Naruto's hands with her own. What kind of father would condemn his own son to a life such as that? Naruto smiled slightly and put his forehead against hers. The kind that loved his village with all his heart. The kind whose morals refused to let him use someone else's child if he couldn't use his own. He gave a soft kiss to Temari on her lips, feeling the unique taste that was to her. The kind that trusted his son above everyone else. Temari gave a watery smile and shook her head. You are something else, Naruto. Naruto chuckled and continued. Anyways, we got off topic. As I was saying, if I chose you, then the village would kill me. If I chose you, I would never have been able to live with myself with the knowledge that Konoha could, or worse, did, kill you, and there was something I could have done something about it and I didn't. Temari's face was unreadable, and just as Naruto was starting to fear that he had spoken something wrong, she asked, but you still chose me over the village. Why? Naruto frowned as he tried to find a way to phase his answer. I felt this sort of connection, for the lack of a better word, between us. We just seemed to sort of click. I felt like I won't ever be able to act like when I was with you with anyone else. Temari looked at him, trying to find something he didn't know, and then slowly hugged him. It was a warm hug, and she was sitting sideways in his lap, so not exactly perfect, but it still made him smile. Perhaps love does not need words to express itself, Temari murmured. She pulled back from the hug and stared into Naruto's confused eyes. Because love is a language in itself. It was at this moment that both of them knew that they cared for each other on a level that went deeper than what they thought. It was love, but neither of them were sure enough to admit it. Naruto nodded with a smile. We can make this work. Temari agreed wholeheartedly with a smile. We can make this work. Naruto had a thought and asked her, so, what do we do now? Dinner time is still half an hour away. Temari thought for a moment and asked, will we be eating out? Naruto shook his head. I was thinking I would treat you all to some homemade food. Actually, that gives me an idea. He formed a half-ram seal and 5 clones popped up. He turned towards one clone. Go to Gaara and Kankuro, tell them to meet me at the house in exactly 1 hour. The clone nodded and vanished in a blue flash. Turning to the other 4, he gave his orders, you 4 start preparing the dinner at home. The 4 clones nodded and vanished in a similar manner as the one before. Temari hummed, impressed. Those shadow clones seem to be damn useful. Naruto smirked. Trust me, they make for great company as well. Both of them chuckled at the thought of talking to yourself when getting bored. As their chuckles faded, Naruto asked, so, what do we do now? Temari thought and smirked as she thought of the perfect way to spend. She smiled coyly as she leaned forward and planted kisses on Naruto's neck, causing his breath to hitch. I can think of something. Naruto was all too happy to indulge her. Warning. Small lime scene. Naruto turned Tamari so he could kiss her lips. Unlike last time, the two immediately engaged in a battle of their tongues without wasting any time. Tamari wrapped her arms around his neck to pull herself closer, while he wrapped his arms around her waist to feel her against his body. Kami, I have missed this, was the sole thought running through both of their minds. The two continued to tongue wrestle for some time, after which Naruto broke off the lip lock, only to start kissing her neck, all the while running his hands on Temari's sides and back. Tamari released a gasp of pleasure and tilted her head to give him more access. She released a quiet moan when he began to suck on her pulse. You've gotten better at this, she managed to breath out. I aim to please, he returned easily. She felt Naruto smile at her compliment as he switched sides. Not only that, since Tamari was sitting so she was facing Naruto's left side, his left hand made its way down from her waist, past her hips and onto her legs. Temari's breath hitched again as Naruto began running his hand across the exposed skin of her legs. You know, I just love your new wardrobe change, he said in a husky voice. Brings out your legs way better than the last one. Glad to know it was worth it, she said in the same tone of voice. Wow, the hormones really were getting out here. Internally, she was growling, only because the same effect won't come in the husky voice. She felt that Naruto had switched from submissive to dominating way too quickly. Well, time to turn the tables. She grabbed his face with her hands and once again engaged him in a battle of tongues. Only this time, she came out as the victor as she explored every inch of his mouth with her tongue. What she didn't know, was that Naruto was only too happy to let her take control like that. It was then he found out a new thing about himself. He loved girls who had a dominating side to them. Of course, he preferred to be in control during this type of activity. He loved the way how Tamari aggressively fought him for control. It really turned him on. Such as now. Tamari felt something poking her right inner thigh. Her brain immediately told her what was poking, and she felt herself smirking against Naruto's lips. She broke off the kiss and smirked at him. Naruto was surprised when Tamari decided to break the lip lock with him. But when he looked at her face, he had to call on almost all of his willpower to not immediately re-engage their lip lock. Her entire face was flushed, lips a little swollen from their tongue dueling, and that smirk was damn sexy. When she spoke, her voice had a sultry tone that he had never heard from her, but he really liked it. Is that your kunai, or are you just happy to see me? With a start, Naruto realized that his erection was poking Tamari in her thigh, through his clothes. Naruto always knew he was blessed, but times like he wished he had worn thicker clothing. But he refused to be embarrassed. It was his reputation at stake here. Apparently, Naruto had been silent for longer than Tamari liked. But she didn't get annoyed. Quite the opposite, really. She made a rather bold move, adjusting herself on his lap, her leg moving against his kunai, in the process. She felt her ego swell a little at the groan that Naruto released. Like that, didn't you? Naruto stared at her with half-lidded eyes. You are evil. He was not about to let this go without a comeback. He used his right hand to pull her face closer, quickly latching onto her earlobe. The gasp she released was well worth, but he wasn't done yet. His left hand roamed her left inner thigh, stopping and lightly squeezing the bare skin right below her panties. He didn't allow her subsequent moan to distract him, however. His right hand brushed across her left breast, his thumb ghosting across the now erect nipple. Her moan was much more audible this time, and Naruto allowed himself a smirk as he sucked on the earlobe. He pulled back to see Temari's face, and felt his pride swell. Temari's chest was heaving, and it was a sight that further aroused him, but he kept himself in check for the moment. Half-lidded eyes that contained frustration, mixed with pleasure and pleading. Guess I did something right, he said as smiled satisfactorily. Tamari was heaving as she glared at him. What Naruto did to her in the past few seconds was almost unbelievable, and felt really good. She never knew a foreign touch was capable of causing such pleasure. She had never been aroused on such a level as before. Lime scene over, you are a tease, she said as she leant against him. Naruto just chuckled and wrapped his arms around her. Though they had been a bit more daring than the last time, both decided that this was a good boundary for now. Learnt from the master, he sassed back. Both were completely aroused right now, but before they could decide on a further course of action, Naruto's clone flashed before them, causing Temari to yelp and clutch Naruto tighter. Naruto only snorted and said, "If you are going to live with me, you better get used to that." But Temari recovered quickly and poked him in the chest. "Oh, no way, Namikaze. Trust me, we are going to lay some ground rules concerning your flashing." Naruto stared at her for a moment, then relented. "Fair enough." Turning to the clone, he asked, "Is dinner ready?" The clone smirked and nodded, causing Naruto to whistle. "Damn, time sure does pass fast when you're having fun." Temari got up so Naruto could get up. "Get Gaara and Kankuro to the dining table. We'll follow." The clone nodded and flashed away. Naruto turned to Temari, who was watching him with a knowing smirk. "What? That's a very impressive size for someone your age," she commented while gesturing below. Naruto quirked an eyebrow before looking down, instantly flushing in embarrassment. His package was clearly visible through the lower he was wearing, proudly standing tall. To save some of his dignity, he asked in return. "And you would know how?" Temari shrugged. "They teach stuff like that to the kunoichi and Suna for the missions that are special." Naruto nodded. "Fair enough. Guess I'll have to settle for a cold shower, then." He grabbed Temari and disappeared in a blue flash. XXXXXXX Kumogakur no Sato was a village that lived up to its name. The village hidden in clouds was at such high altitude that it literally was hidden among the clouds. This village was the shinobi village of Kaminari no Kuni, the land of lightning. Its leader was called the Raikage, literally meaning the lightning shadow. The current Raikage was simply known as A, and right now, he was staring at the destroyed furniture in his office, thinking about the latest news his spy had delivered. Uzumaki Naruto was the one and only son of Namikaze Minato. At first, A's interest was aroused by the fact alone that an Uzumaki had survived and was living in Konoha right now. Uzushiogakure no Sato had been completely destroyed in the Second Great War, with the combined efforts of Kumo and Iwa. Of course, a few scant survivors might have managed to escape, but it's not as if they can do anything. Then came the Third War, in which Kumo had lost badly, but not as badly as Iwa did. Konoha no Kuroi Senko, Namikaze Minato, had single-handedly secured Konoha's victory in the war. The man had earned the entire shinobi world's fear, and grudging respect of a few. In fact, Minato came to be so feared that while the man's short reign as the Yondaime Hokage, no village even dared to so much as look at Konoha with the intent of fighting it. The world was aware of what happened to Iwa's forces, and no one wanted the wrath of the Yellow Flash to be directed at them. But 13 years ago, the legendary Flash had died fighting to save his village from the Kyuubi. Contrary to what many people in his village felt, I held great respect for Minato. He was the only one to completely outspeed and blindside him in their single fight against each other in the war. A respected strength, and Minato had proven himself stronger, and way faster than him. I considered Minato his rival, and was understandable upset when the only person who could give him a run for his speed left the world. But looking at the situation from a political angle, it meant that Konoha no longer had the might of the Yellow Flash in their hands. And Iwa had rejoiced at the death of that man. But now he was hearing this. A blonde boy, no older than 13, with azure blue eyes named Uzumaki Naruto. A genin of Konoha who had been participating in the Chunin exams as a student of Hitaki Kakashi, the copy ninja. He was a non-entity to his spy until the moment it was announced that Uzumaki Naruto was the son of the Yondaime Hokage. And he was powerful, more than most of the Jonin, his spy was saying. This Naruto had trumped a Hyuga in taijutsu. Like it was nothing, and had used Fuinjutsu and Hiraishin in great conjunction to take out Suna's Jinchuriki. All in all, Uzumaki Naruto spelled trouble for the nations. The boy was clearly powerful, and coupled with the Hiraishin could match some of the world's greatest shinobi. If he was allowed to get even more powerful, the balance of power among the nations could dangerously tip in Konoha's favor. But even knowing this, I could not afford to go to war with Konoha, even if his military was much larger than the other villages. Much as he hated to admit, if Kumo had quantity, then Konoha had quality. He sat down in his chair and thought. Right now, the news was that Suna had decided to regain its alliance with the Leaf by using the old tradition of an arranged marriage. Sabaku no Temari, the daughter of the Yondaime Kazekage, had been set to marry Uzumaki Naruto. No doubt, Not only would the marriage cement their alliance, but the offspring of the two would no doubt be powerful. But he had to take into account the Leaf as well. For all its powerful shinobi, the Leaf was not a provocative village. They never made the first move in any of the great wars. For now, he would keep the boy in check. It was all he could do right now. XXXXXXX Iwagakure was a village that harbored feelings of great hate towards the Hidden Leaf. Ever since the Third Great War ended, the Tsuchikage, Onoki, resented the Leaf. Onoki was an old, but powerful shinobi. The only one in the world with Jinten, the dust release. Onoki relied on the dust release far more than he cared to admit. He was a shinobi who had seen all the three great wars, and had lived through them. But of the three, the third war was the one he hated the most because of the crushing, humiliating defeat they suffered at the hands of just one man from Konoha, Namikaze Minato. The blow to Iwa's pride, along with its forces, was so large that Iwa had yet to fully recover from it. Onoki hated the man with all his being at first, but after 2 years of heavy dwelling, he found that Namikaze Minato had done what anyone would have done in his place. Namikaze Minato had protected his home. It was war, and losses were dealt to both the sides. While Iwa suffered the heaviest, all the villages were fighting to survive. Konoha just happened to have a card that was better than theirs. Holding onto grudges like that did no one good. Namikaze Minato deserved his rest after what he did to protect his village. So Onoki did the wise thing. He let his irrational hatred go. Of course, that could not be said for the whole village. Countless had lost their families due to the slaughter Namikaze had brought upon them. His own granddaughter was one such example. Kuretsuchi lost her mother in the war, and had blamed it all on Namikaze. Onoki honestly was worried for her mental health. Blaming a man who was just doing his job was hardly fair, after all. And now there was this news. His spy had delivered the news of utmost importance. Apparently, the Yellow Flash had a child, whose name was Uzumaki Naruto. At first, Onoki couldn't quite believe the message. When he did, he had just collapsed onto his chair in disbelief. He had seen the power of Namikaze Minato, and he was not interested in seeing that again. At first, he would have happily given the order to assassinate the boy and his recently known fiancé, to make sure that every trace of Namikaze Minato was wiped out from the face of the world. But now, he was content to just keep his distance. He knew that Namikaze lived by a code: as long as you kept your distance and didn't harm his close ones, he was content to leave you alone as well. I look forward to see what you become, Namikaze Naruto. Unfortunately, he forgot to safely put the document. Chapter 24 25. It had been about 4 days since Temari came to Konoha, and those 4 days were some of the most enjoyable days of Naruto's life. He was off duty, on strict orders by Tsunade. Naruto had no problem with using his time to either train with the Sand siblings, or work on his newest sealing project he found in his father's study. Training with Temari was fun, because they hadn't trained together since Chunin exams, and they both enjoyed every second of it. It was clear that Naruto held the upper hand in taijutsu due to his speed and reflexes. Temari had, on more than one occasion, suspiciously asked him and his friends whether Naruto had a bloodline that allowed him to this fast at his age, because no other shinobi of his age was that fast. They had spent more time together than before. They could be seen together training on one of the grounds sometimes, or just taking a walk around the village, or eating at Ikiraku's. Even though his marriage to Temari gave Naruto plenty of good reasons to spend more time with her, he unfortunately had become a victim of his friends and worse, Jiraiya's teasing. He had accomplished quite a bit in the 4 days that she and her brothers had been in Konoha. He had talked to Temari about how their relationship would progress, if they could make it work or not, followed by an extremely hot makeout session. And they had been having a lot of those recently. Most of them were either in the house when they were alone, or sometimes in the training grounds. They even had 2 of them in alleyways, just like any teenage couple with raging hormones. Kurama had made himself a cave in his mind to block it all out. They had been steadily getting bolder with each other, and Naruto knew that it won't be long before the Naruto shook his head violently, trying to get rid of the blush that had been forming on his face. He was on an errand, quite a serious one, because he needed to talk to both Jiraiya and Tsunade about this, if his father's notes were anything to go by. The journal was about something that Naruto would never have expected from his father. It was filled to the last page with sealing equations and math, all of which required a constant study from Naruto's clones over 2 days. In the end, it all came down to one thing. Namikaze Minato had used Fuinjutsu to successfully enhance the human body. Namely, his own. Now if it were any other person, Naruto was pretty sure he would have set the book on fire with a Kaden Jutsu, then shut the ashes in a box and then fried the box. But this was his father he was talking about here. The Yondaime Hokage, the Yellow Flash, one of the greatest seal masters to ever live. One can't just throw away the work of a genius like that. On the first day, the day after they came, he had fixed Gaara's seal with Jiraiya's help. To say that the seal was a shoddy piece of work was the greatest understatement ever. When he had examined the seal after removing the Gogyo Fuin he had put over it, there was no other way to say this. Naruto had been fucking pissed. So pissed off he was that he had destroyed almost half of a training ground in his rage. He wanted to find whoever made that insult to Fuinjutsu and raze them into the ground. He wanted to make them suffer, because they deliberately made Gaara suffer. The seal was designed such that it barely kept Shukaku inside Gaara, which was most probably the reason for Gaara's insomnia. Shukaku had more control over Gaara than Gaara had control of him. The seal was meant to grant Gaara all of Shukaku's abilities from the very beginning itself, even if they didn't have any friendship like his and Kurama's between them at all. It was a process of 7 hours to fix the seal. First, Naruto and Jiraiya figured out the way to safely remove the seal without setting Shukaku free. Then Naruto had, using his father's and mother's notes about seals for Jinchuriki, chosen a seal that would work on Gaara. He did not even think about using the 8 trigrams seal once. The seal Naruto had chosen to replace Gaara's seal was a bit more simpler. He had asked Gaara whether he still wanted access to Shukaku's powers, because that was what he had based his selection of seal on. After a little deliberation with his siblings, Gaara had told him that he did not want any more access to that power, if it always meant losing his mind and sanity in the process. And Naruto doubted Shukaku was willing to get along with humans. But if Gaara were to ever run out of his chakra, he would have no backup to fall back on, as is the perk for all the Jinchuriki. So in the end, Naruto tweaked the seal a little, placing a limit and an additional gate on it, without compromising the rest of the seal. The gate would allow a certain amount of Biju chakra to flow through the seal, the amount being determined by the limiter. After the limit has been reached, the limiter would shut the gate. Like that, Gaara would have a back supply to fall back on, without ever needing to interact with Shukaku. The actual, practical part of the process only took 1 hour. First, Jiraiya would remove the seal, with Naruto using a weak, but temporary seal to hold Shukaku from escaping, while Jiraiya applied the new, improved seal. Since the seal was temporary and therefore, very weak, it required an enormous amount of chakra to be held in place against a tailed beast. The job was given to Naruto because he possessed those monstrous reserves of chakra. But even for someone like Naruto, whose chakra reserves were like an ocean among ponds, the job was hard. When Jiraiya had finally finished applying the seal, Naruto had almost run out of chakra, which was a first for him. He had fallen unconscious just as the new seal had activated. When he had woken up, he had found himself, not for the first time, in a room in the hospital. Tsunade had proceeded to yell at him for making her worry like that, and then she almost broke him bones by hugging him to death. She then proceeded to tell him that he had been unconscious for a good 5 hours, because he had nearly emptied his chakra tank. After getting released, he had then went back to his house with Temari, who had been in tears, though of joy or worry, Naruto hadn't been able to tell. Flashback: Naruto had just flashed back to his home's living room when he was tackled by a blonde blur, straight into the couch. It took him 1 second to realize that the sobbing person hugging him was his soon-to-be wife. He just sighed in relaxation and wrapped his arms around her, returning her hug. Temari hadn't stopped worrying about Naruto from the moment he had fallen unconscious. She had so badly wanted to rush to him, but Shizune-san held her back forcibly, telling her that Tsunade-sama wanted to make sure that Naruto was alright. Although, she assured Temari that Naruto had probably fallen unconscious due to chakra exhaustion. Even if that did little to assure her, she failed to mention the extreme part. For Temari, it felt like every second was as long as a minute, for Naruto showed no signs of waking up at all. Tsunade had ordered her to go back home after her fourth hour of staying in the room. She had assured her that she would be the first person Tsunade would send Naruto after she had discharged him. You had me completely worried, Baka, she whispered as she clung to him. Naruto placed a soft kiss on her hair. Removing a seal is tricky business, Temari. Holding a Biju back from escaping even more so. I told you that before we began the procedure, you know. But, you never told me you would almost empty your chakra reserves. Naruto chuckled as he adjusted her on his lap so she was facing him more comfortably. Her eyes were red from crying, and tear tracks had formed on her cheeks. A lone tear made its way down, only to be kissed away by him. Well, I was holding a Biju back, so my chakra reserves had to take a hit. Temari smiled and just leaned into him, wrapping her arms around his neck. You don't get to worry me like that, Naruto. Naruto wrapped his own arms around her. I know, and I'm really sorry, but this is one of the times when it just can't be helped. Sometime in the future, something might happen to you, and I would lose my head and give you the same lecture you are giving me now. After a moment of pause, he continued in a more positive tone. Look on the bright side though. Gaara will be able to sleep to his heart's content now. I look forward to not seeing him look like an actual raccoon. Temari couldn't help the chuckle. You're right. He will finally be able to sleep after years of insomnia. Naruto smiled, just nodding in reply. They just enjoyed each other's company for the moment. Gaara was under observation for now, to check if the seal holds, with Kankuro with him. There was a very slim chance of the seal breaking, though. Naruto had made sure of that. Apparently, Temari also realized the absence of her brothers, for she leaned away from him, giving him a coy look. I think I haven't thanked you properly enough, Naruto, for doing such a favor to Gaara. He shivered as she leaned in and started placing kisses along his neck. His own hands roamed her body as he allowed her to do that. He enjoyed the moments where he allowed Temari to be the dominant one. How about we just pass the time for now? Flashback and the makeout session that had followed was the most intense one they had had, and the first one in which they had reached the height of pleasure. Well, the height they could without having sex, that is. The excitement and the thrill had broke the roof that evening. Naruto's lower had gotten really messy, along with Temari's panties. Anyways, the day was over, with Naruto and Temari having dinner together, for Gaara was to stay at the hospital for at least one more day. The second day is a bit of a mystery, for both you readers and Temari. Naruto had left the house very early, leaving his clones to prepare breakfast for the siblings and with a message that there was something very important that Naruto had to do and as such, he would be busy the whole day. Temari had been quite upset about that, because she enjoyed the training sessions she and Naruto had. Every session she learned something new, either about shinobi skills, or just about Naruto himself. She had asked the clones just what was Naruto doing, but the clones said that they had been instructed to keep it a secret from her. Temari had not been pleased, but relented. She had then gone out to find Naruto's friends, to spend some time to get to know them. The first person she had met was the pink-head, Sakura. She had first spotted her on one of the training grounds. Sakura had offered to show her around if she liked, to introduce her to Naruto's friends. Temari had accepted the offer and tagged along. Let's just say that it was a very long day and leave it at that. Naruto on the other hand, had gone to conduct some extremely personal business. He figured that since he was about to get married, might as well follow the tradition. The third day, he had introduced Temari to his summons. She had already been familiar to Raiden, but he let her get to know him a bit more. She would be seeing a lot of him, after all. Finding out that Raiden now had a new tail was a surprise, though. He introduced to her too. Raiden's brother as well. Toshi, Raiden's elder brother, who was a part of the trackers of the Kitsune. As a tracker, his size and power would be restricted to 3 tails, for he was not a fighter, unlike Raiden, who would grow up to be as big as his father. Toshi had a quiet, serious personality, with a light sense of humor that shone through when he was not training or on a mission. However, he was extremely good at what he did. At first, Naruto had doubted he could form a friendship with Toshi like he had did with Raiden. But that doubt had been quickly washed away when they had bonded. Toshi was a pretty cool guy in the short time that Naruto had known him. And he had a lot of stories to tell about his job as one of the trackers, and as the brother of Raiden. Him and Temari had not bonded as fast as he and Naruto did, but that was understandable considering Temari already had a summons. The fourth day, that was today, Naruto had an important errand to run. He had discussed with Temari the rules that concerned his study. Right now, he had not given her the password, because the mechanism behind it was a little tricky and took time to explain, but he would once he was done with the errand. He arrived outside Tsunade's office, knocking the door thrice. Once he heard her permission to enter, he opened the door, finding her and Jiraiya talking, well, more like bickering. Tsunade looked annoyed by the fact that Jiraiya kept using one of her windows to enter, while Jiraiya honestly looked insulted at the thought of using doors. But Naruto knew that no matter what happened to Jiraiya, he would never stop using windows to enter rooms. He liked annoying people that way. Naruto! Jiraiya exclaimed, briskly walking over to him and wrapping an arm around his shoulders, almost dragging him in front of Tsunade's table. Tell her how insulting it is to use doors when you are a ninja. No, I will not, Naruto sighed in exasperation. Better you than me at the end of her fist. Tsunade smirked while Jiraiya gasped, looking betrayed. How could you, Naruto? Can we please just get to business? I'd rather finish this as quickly as possible and spend the rest of the day with Temari instead of some old people. As he expected, Tsunade was the only one who took any offense to the old comment. Jiraiya, on the other hand, seemed to have not heard it at all. Instead, he focused his attention on the other part of the statement. His mouth stretched into a perverted line. Oh. Spend the day with her, how? A fist crashed on top of his head, courtesy of the female blonde in the room. That is none of your business. Naruto gave a thankful nod to her as Jiraiya grumbled and fell in line with him, both standing in front of the Hokage table. Tsunade took her seat while he and Jiraiya stood. So, Naruto, what is it that you want to discuss so badly? In answer, Naruto just took out a storage scroll from one of the pockets in his Jonin vests and unsealed the contents, which was his father's journal. The effect was instantaneous. Both the faces of the adults hardened into seriousness, and quick as a flash, Tsunade flashed through hand seals that sealed the room completely. All the Anbu were outside and Jiraiya was beside him in an instant. Where did you get that? The question was asked with such gruffness that it surprised Naruto. The man had never seemed more serious than before. It seemed, however, that these two had knowledge of what was written in the journal. Tsunade also seemed equally, if not more, serious than Jiraiya. Naruto put the journal on the desk and answered, I found it in my study. Tsunade quirked an eyebrow, your study? Naruto deadpanned at her, it was my father's, but since he's not here, it is now mine. But that's not relevant. He motioned to the journal, what do you know about that? He quickly got annoyed, though, when he saw the hesitation on their faces, as clear as water. He narrowed his eyes, folding his arms across his chest, I'm waiting. It was Minato's pet project, ever since he got the idea in his head that the human body could be enhanced, without any drawback. Jiraiya's answer only increased Naruto's curiosity and irritation. I already know that, he snapped. You don't think I've read the journal and studied it? Ever since the delegate from Suna has arrived, I have had my clones do the studying for me, to understand one of my father's masterpieces. What I want to know, is whether he actually performed it on himself or not. He did. Naruto released a breath, giving them a look to continue. Tsunade continued, Jiraiya told me that it was only a stray idea that popped into Minato's head one day. He wanted to know if seals were capable of pushing the human body beyond the peak of its highest potential. He wanted to create a super soldier, Naruto whispered in amazement. Jiraiya nodded, that's exactly what he wanted to do, but I had firmly told him that it was not possible. No matter how versatile Fuinjutsu is, the seals required for what he wanted to achieve simply didn't exist. Not mention, even if he succeeded in creating such seals, hypothetically, what would he test them upon? He shook his head. It was an impossible task. To create an entirely new series of seals that would work together to enhance the human body beyond its limits. But again, your father treated the word like he had never heard of it. A fond, yet impossibly proud at the same time look, came upon his face. It took him 4 years of work on the seals, along with Kushina, to perfect it. Not only that, but he created an entirely new type of clone to test the seals out and perfect the seals. The blood clone, Naruto whispered. Tsunade took off from where Jiraiya left. Exactly. The type of clone that is entirely separate from the user, having no connection to it at all, other than being made from the user's blood and one aspect of the user's personality. When he made it, Minato had no uses for it in mind, other than using it for his tests. It was entirely useless, and too impractical. It took up way too much of the user's chakra, almost half a quarter more than the shadow clone. Jiraiya took over from there. But in the end, it worked very well for his trials. In the end, Minato had conducted a total of 98 trials, 86 of which were failures, back to back. But the last 12, they were the successes Minato was desperately hoping for. After the 12th success, Minato finally imprinted the seals on himself. As much as I like the tale, how were you involved in this process? Naruto's sarcasm wasn't missed. A guilty look came across Jiraiya's face. Tsunade sighed and looked down. I wasn't exactly involved, Jiraiya admitted. More like I told him that it just wasn't possible. Tsunade, on the other hand, was the medical advisor on the project. Since Minato was creating an entirely new set of seals, he asked me to be the advisor for this project. My knowledge of the human body and medical seals was required for him to calculate how exactly to enhance a specific part of the body and by how much, Tsunade revealed. And he was successful in the end, Naruto concluded. Jiraiya nodded. We were there, of course, when he decided to apply the seals onto himself, to intervene in any sort of an emergency. But it wasn't needed. Minato was in pain for over an hour, but when it was finally over, he had succeeded. He had enhanced his own body perfectly. There was a reason that only 4 people were involved in this project. He even kept the Hokage in the dark about this, as daring as it was, Tsunade revealed. Why? Jiraiya's face turned grim. There was no way we could risk this project to fall into someone else's hands. Orochimaru, Naruto realized. Tsunade nodded. The rumors surrounding him at that time made us very suspicious of him. If he even got the wind of what Minato had achieved, he would have done anything to get his hands on the formulae. Naruto nodded and slowly walked around the office, trying to think about what he should do. Jiraiya did not need to be a Yamanaka to know what was going on in Naruto's mind. You want to perform the procedure as well, don't you? But Naruto wasn't listening to him anymore. What do you think, Kurama? That you father was one smart son of a bitch, Kurama drawled back. Naruto gave an internal annoying sigh. Not that I'm against you praising my father, I am talking about another matter. I'm not praising that blonde vermin. Kurama snarled inside his mind. Then, in a much calmer voice, he continued. Also, it would give you quite an advantage for you, should you undergo the procedure. I have seen it from inside your mother, and I know what the results would be. Naruto rose an eyebrow. I sense but, coming. Kurama nodded. I think that you should wait for 1 or 2 years before undergoing the procedure. It would be wise if you underwent it at the same age your father did. Best not to take any chances. Naruto was excited, as any child of his age, when he heard that he could get stronger in a way that would be cool, but he rarely let excitement make his decisions for him. Disappointed, yet accepting of Kurama's advice, he nodded. Turning back, he saw the concerned look over the adults' faces. What? Tsunade spoke up. You alright? Naruto waved away her concern. Nothing. I was just talking to the Kyuubi. Tsunade's eyes bugged out in horror. What? Naruto raised an eyebrow in confusion. Ero Sennin didn't tell you that. Tsunade's face twisted into one of rage and annoyance as she turned to the white-haired sage, who was trembling in his place. He weakly defended himself. I forgot. Tsunade cracked her knuckles as she walked forward menacingly. I'll give you a dose of medicine that will strengthen your memory. What followed next was history repeating itself. Naruto just shrugged and took his leave. He had another errand to do anyways. XXXXXXX Tamari was sitting in the dining area of her soon-to-be home, sipping some tea she had made for herself. As she relished the hot, steaming beverage soothing her throat, she thought back to the last few days she spent with Naruto. He was very affectionate to her, she had observed. He was very gentle when talking to her, but too much as to treat her like she was precious glass. He respected her kunoichi in her own right, and wasn't afraid to beat her into the ground to get a point across when they trained together. He genuinely seemed to love her, if the small, but sweet gestures by him were anything to go by. She greatly enjoyed the times when they were intimate. The hot, steamy make-out sessions with him that got bolder every time were something she would always enjoy, but the occasional hug, snuggle and cuddle with him was she would never get bored of. Such sweet gestures made her love him even more. The love between them was growing stronger steadily. She didn't even need to say how accomplished he was as a shinobi at such a young age, however, it was how he normally acted that surprised her. Naruto was generally a very calm person, and very observant. He was not a foolish idealist, but rather his ideals were approached with a realistic and a pragmatic approach. This was something he told her himself. He did not disapprove of having ideals to live by and accomplish, but he seemed to genuinely loathe those people who blindly tried to achieve those ideals without taking the reality into account. Naruto had told her, in a joking way, that people seemed to think he was a very patient person. And it was true, mostly on the outside though. Rarely did any one of his friends say that they had seen Naruto get angry, but Naruto had quietly told her the truth one time when they were cuddling in the living room. He preferred not to show his rage on the outside, but keep it within him and channel it in an effective way. Naruto hated when he was not in control of things, but that did not go to say that he was a control freak. He was more than happy to let others control things for him when he deemed himself incapable to do so. Before she could dwell on her thoughts more, she jumped a bit when the door to the gardens outside was opened, a figure stepping inside. She had almost thrown a kunai at the figure when she recognized the blonde hair of Naruto. She relaxed and let out the breath she was holding. At least knock before you enter, will you? She muttered. Naruto smiled sheepishly and raised his hands. I just wanted to see how you would react. Temari snorted. I almost threw a kunai at your head. Naruto nodded approvingly and walked around the sofa to sit with her. He wrapped an arm around her, gently pulling her into his side. I had something to talk about with our Hokage. Temari rested her head on his shoulder. They rested like that for a while, after which Temari muttered, today has been a slow day. Naruto's hand, that was rubbing her side absently, not that she minded, stopped. Slow as in, boring. Temari nodded in reply. She had been bored out of her mind. She would have trained, or explored the village, but for some reason, she was feeling quite lazy today. You want to go on a date? Her brow furrowed as she tilted her head to gaze into his azures. His eyes were twinkling with mischief, which caused her to put up her guard. From what she had seen, Naruto was not a person to pull many pranks, but she did not know that he was the resident prankster of the village. She raised an eyebrow questioningly. A date? Naruto nodded excitedly. Yeah. She thought about it a bit. It had been a while since they had been on one of those, in the past 2 days. Sure, why not? Naruto grinned like the cat who got the canary. Great. Be ready at 8 in the evening. Wear something nice and casual. With that, he suddenly got up from the couch, whistling a random tune. Temari chuckled and shook her head fondly at his amusing antics. Naruto was sure a peculiar person. XXXXXXX. It was 15 minutes to 8 when Temari finished getting ready. She had taken a hot shower at 8:20, and then got ready. She did not usually apply makeup, but since this was a date with Naruto and not a meal after one of their training sessions, she applied a little bit of it. She had a feeling this would be special. She had put on a sleeveless, loose white blouse with straps over her shoulders, and a blue jeans that hugged her legs nicely. She had only put on some powder and lipstick, mainly because she had no idea how to properly put it on as she never cared much for it. She exited her room and went down the stairs, into the living room and saw Naruto. This was the first time she had seen him in a casual look and she had to say, he looked exceptionally handsome in the look. He wore a peach t-shirt inside a brown, full-sleeved shirt with buttons open, and the sleeves rolled up to the elbows. He wore khaki pants underneath, finishing with a different pair of sport shoes than she usually saw him. He also wore a black headband instead of his Hitai-8, into his usual hairstyle. Needless to say, Temari loved the look. Naruto on the other hand, was blown away by how exceptionally beautiful Temari looked for their date. She always looked beautiful to him, but today it looked more special than it usually did. Even her hair was tied into 2 ponytails, contrary to her usual 4. He smiled as she came close to him and wrapped her arms around his neck, him automatically wrapping his around her waist, pushing them close. She smiled like an angel. So, where are you taking me tonight? Naruto smiled as he stole a quick kiss from her. Your look alone makes me want to ravish you here and now. Forget about the wedding, he said as he planted light kisses on her neck. Tamari blushed, making her face go dark red. The blush looked darker than usual because of her makeup. But she couldn't resist the moan when Naruto began planting kisses on her neck. She pulled him closer and tilted her neck to give him more access. Much to her silent protests, he pulled away. As much as I would like to do that, he said with a protesting face, we have an appointment in 10 minutes. Shall we? She smiled and hooked her arm with his, both of them going out of the house. It was somewhat nice, Naruto mused, to walk to places sometimes instead of just teleporting. It made you notice certain things that were not possible to be noticed in flashing. Like how the people wore smiles and not so subtly pointed at them and whispering. Like how a little girl would blush when he looked at her and hid her face behind her mother's legs, peeking out to look at them. He chuckled in amusement, drawing Temari's attention. What is it? Naruto shook his head. Just a little girl blushing at the sight of us. Temari gave a meaningful look to him. At the sight of you mean, she said in a teasing voice. Naruto smoothly shot back at her. I never said that. It could also be at the sight of you. Then why didn't you say that earlier? Naruto had no reply to that question, why made Temari giggle. It was rare for Naruto to not have a comeback, and she relished the few times she had been able to achieve that. After 5 minutes of walking, they arrived at a fancy-looking restaurant. Fancy as in the kind where most of the people could come and eat, not the one that was only attended by the most snobbish people, which turned out to be, most of the times, the rich ones. Temari could see a lot of people in the restaurant, which was fairly big. Naruto and her walked up to the receptionist, the former addressing him. I have an 8:15 reservation. The receptionist frowned and looked up. Namikaze Naruto. Yes. The receptionist motioned one of the waiters. He will guide you to your table, Naruto-sama. Naruto barely kept from rolling his eyes, while Temari quietly giggled beside him. He good-naturedly elbowed her in the ribs, yeah, very funny. To her surprise, the waiter led them upstairs to the roof, where the table were arranged. Few people were on the roof, chatting among themselves quietly. Temari figured that the tables up on the roof must be for the people who wanted some privacy. The waiter sat them down on the table and they quickly gave their orders. Once he was gone, they started talking. You know Naruto, your choice for where our date would be is commendable. Naruto smiled and replied, yeah, I kind of wanted our date to be in a place where we both would be comfortable, but not so much as to come off like showing my wealth. He spread out his arms. This place offers great food, and privacy as well, not to mention the view from the roof is just mind-blowing. It was for me, when I came here for the first time. Temari looked around, feeling the cool breeze blowing around them. She got up and went to the railing, smiling at the view of the village that met her. Lights everywhere, it looked like the village itself was breathing with life. Not as great as the view that was offered from the Hokage mountain, but it was beautiful nonetheless. She went back to her seat. You chose a great place, she told him as she took his hand in hers. Naruto smiled as he rubbed his thumb on her hand. Funny story, actually, how I got us this seat. Temari tilted her head in question, which he answered. Normally, they don't give rooftop reservations to teenagers. You must have noticed that we are the only teenagers up here. Temari wasn't an idiot. She had noticed that particular detail, and she quickly pieced together what he was trying to say. Her lips turned upwards into a smirk. You used your name to get this table, didn't you? Naruto's eyes twinkled with mischief and pride, the latter aimed at Temari. You know, you alarm me sometimes with how sharp you are. Temari accepted the compliment with a nod. It wasn't exactly hard. Also, if you used your influence to get us this table, does this mean that clan heirs can come here as well? Naruto smirked. You know, with some training, we can make a great detective out of you. Temari laughed lightly. I'm not suited for that. Maybe something little more kick-ass. Both of them lightly chuckled at that. Yes, clan heirs can come here. You need to understand that in Konoha, people who have good influence are treated a little better than those who don't. Which is not to say, the people with less influence get mediocre service. He leaned forward, as if sharing a secret. It's even better if you are related to the Hokage. Between us, I plan on using my influence whenever I can, he smirked at the last bit. Temari gave him an approving look. Good to see that you are not overly modest. Naruto just looked to the sky with a smile. Out of the corner of his eye, he spotted a waiter coming their way. Looks like our meals have arrived. They made small talk between their meals, mostly about what they would like to become in the future. Of course, Temari already knew that Naruto's dream was to become the greatest Hokage ever. But it came as a surprise to Naruto that Temari wanted to be the greatest master of wind release there ever was. Of course, Naruto knew that she was already highly proficient with her large war fan, but had yet to begin training with the smaller ones. That sparked an idea in his mind, but he would get to that later. They finished their meals, paid for it and left. They were just strolling in the village with no destination in mind. Unknown to Temari, Naruto was steadily getting nervous. He had something he had to do tonight, something very important, and he did not want to mess it up. You won't. Naruto smiled a bit at Kurama's reassurance and turned his head to look at Temari. She was looking around, admiring the sights. He nudged her, causing her to face him. How about we get somewhere private to sit down? She smiled. I don't have a problem. Suddenly, they were standing on top of Yondaim's head, overlooking the village. Naruto sat down, leaning his back against a spike of hair. Temari sat down beside him, leaning against his side. He wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. Naruto always treasured the time when he just got to sit like this with Temari and enjoy the silence. You ever wonder about the future? Temari's sudden question startled him out of his thoughts, and he turned to look at her. She was still facing the village, head on his shoulder. Sometimes I do, though I prefer to live in the present. Why? Naruto thought a bit about the answer and then replied, I can control what I do in the present. The future I cannot. Temari turned her head towards him with a frown. But the actions you do, influence your future. Wouldn't you know the outcome of your actions? Naruto smiled as he gave his answer. I'm not the only one influencing my future now, am I? Temari looked deep in thought at that. Naruto turned his gaze back to the village with a smile, but in his mind, it was like a brooding feeling. He could feel it, a storm was coming towards them, and he wasn't sure if they were prepared or not. But he would do whatever he could to ensure that whatever was his would remain safe. But then he remembered what he came here to do. He unwrapped his arm around Temari and got up, getting a confused look from her. Will you stand up for a second? When she obliged, he gently grabbed her shoulders and stared into her teal eyes. Suddenly, it seemed a lot harder, and he almost wanted to turn around, but he was an Uzumaki, damn it. They don't run away from their problems. Temari, I am going to ask you a question. You just need to say yes or no, got it? He asked it with all the seriousness he could muster. Temari frowned as she was baffled by his request, but nodded. Naruto let out a breath and removed his arms from her shoulders, putting them into his pockets. He took a deep breath and relaxed. I really don't know how to say this, but I'll try my best. Temari, we both are powerful shinobi of our generations, and perhaps the most loyal, considering that we are willing to marry each other to cement our alliance. Temari stood before him, looking completely confused and a bit alarmed. Nonetheless, Naruto continued. It was one of my happiest days when we made out in that alleyway. In fact, that may have been the foundation to our growing love. Even though Temari was blushing, the words felt alien to his tongue. He was not used to speaking in this way. For a person who always went straight to the point, this was difficult for him. A lot of time has passed since then, and we are about to get married in the next 3 days. But I felt that, I must not break the tradition of a wedding, so. He took out a small box from his pocket and opened it, revealing a stunning gold ring with intricate design on its band, but she had already gotten the point. Temari gasped in surprise and delight, her eyes filling with tears. This was what he had in mind all along. Marry me. Naruto had barely asked her the question when she jumped into his arms, her own wrapping around his neck tightly. His own wrapped themselves around her waist as he gave an ear-to-ear smile. This probably, no, without doubt, was the happiest moment in his life. Yes. Yes. Temari hugged Naruto with all her might as her tears finally escaped. But the tears were of joy, and she was sure she had never been more happier in her life. It was every girl's dream to be proposed by the guy she loved, and since it was a political marriage, it had never occurred to Temari that Naruto would pop the question to her. They had been extremely lucky in the first place that they had gotten engaged to each other. She pulled back and held out her left hand for him to slide the ring on, which he did with the biggest smile she had ever seen on his face. When she looked closer, even his eyes seemed a little wet. It was then she got a close look at the ring. It was gold, shining like his hair. It perplexed her a little that the intricate design on it seemed to be on the inside instead of the outside. The outside was plain gold, with a, surprisingly, head of a fox. Tamari already knew which fox was that and she turned to him in question. Naruto smiled and replied, "He has been a large part of my life till now, and will continue to be. In fact, he would never leave me, so I just had to include him." Tamari smiled and brushed her tears. He continued, "You see the intricate design on the inside. Those are seals. One of them is a tiny version of my Hiraishin marker. Just channel a bit your chakra in the ring and I'll be there. Also, I incorporated a blood seal as well. Whoever tries to remove that ring by surprise will have a nasty surprise waiting for him, including cutting off your finger." She looked at the ring on her finger in wonder. "How did you write the seals on the inside?" Naruto shrugged. "Shadow clones are very handy. They can transform into literally anything, including smaller versions of themselves." Tamari laughed and hugged him tightly. After what happened in the last minute, she didn't want to let go of him. She realized in this moment, and she was no longer afraid of telling him. She was completely sure. "I love you." Naruto was completely taken aback with those words. They were the words that he had been yearning to hear all of his life from someone. Sure, Jiraiya had his own way of saying that he cared about him, but hearing the words out loud was a different feeling entirely. He really didn't have words for it. Really? His voice broke for the first time when speaking to someone, but somehow, he didn't hate himself for it. Tamari smiled and just hugged him tenderly. Yes. His own arms wrapped around her waist tightly, and tears flowed from his eyes for the first time in a very long time. He was able to whisper back to her, "I love you too." XXXXXXX. Gaara and Kankuro were sitting in the living room, just passing time. Kankuro was actually explaining to Gaara how he worked his puppets when the redhead expressed his interest in them. They both jumped, however, when Naruto and Tamari suddenly appeared in front of them, arms wrapped around each other and giggling. Kankuro immediately assumed the worst, which was Naruto doing naughty things with his sister. But before he could act foolishly, as always, he noticed that Tamari seemed to be unusually happy. In fact, she was glowing from happiness. Gaara noticed it too, for he asked her, "What is it that you're so happy about, Tamari?" Tamari stopped giggling, but the huge smile didn't leave her face. "Naruto proposed to me." At that, Kankuro stupidly asked her, "Why? You were already going to get married. There was no need to, as long as Tamari is happy." Gaara interrupted, knowing that Kankuro would probably say something that would ruin Tamari's mood. "I have no problem with it." Tamari smiled as she hugged Gaara. "Thank you so much, Gaara." She made Naruto sit down with her and recounted the details of their date to them, with unusual excitement. It was the first time that Naruto had seen her acting like Ino or Sakura, though the latter had cut down on her fangirling ways. Gaara was genuinely happy for them, while Kankuro earned himself a bashing from Tamari when he told Naruto in no uncertain terms that he was to inform Kankuro when he would go out with Tamari. While that left Naruto annoyed, he simply told Kankuro that he earned the bashing from his sister, and he would deliver it as well if he continued spouting bullshit. Gaara simply shook his head at his brother's foolishness, happy that he at least had common sense that his brother seemed to eternally lack. He congratulated the couple and retired for the night. It was a strange feeling to be asleep, and it had tickled Naruto's funny bone when Gaara had asked him if it was okay to get addicted to sleep. Naruto had laughed for an entire minute at that question, and when he stopped, he clapped Gaara on the shoulder and said, "You aren't the only one, buddy." He also took Kankuro with him using his sand, taking care that he did not litter the house with it. Soon enough, night came and Naruto prepared to sleep. To be truthful, he still hadn't gotten off the high that Tamari had told him she loved him. He knew that he wouldn't be getting sleep anytime soon due to his excitement, so he pulled out a card deck and settled himself on his bed for a few games with his clones. Kami, he was crazy. He was about to summon his clones when his door was knocked. He frowned and looked at the clock on the wall. Who could be knocking at 11? He opened the door, only for his breath to hitch slightly. Tamari was leaning against his doorframe, dressed in a loose t-shirt that went down till her half-thighs, exposing her long legs. Naruto seriously thought that they were the best feature about her after her eyes. She smiled. Hey. He managed to return. Hey yourself. If those are your nightclothes, I will never get tired of seeing you in that. Tamari chuckled. So glad you like it. Naruto found himself in an awkward position. What was he supposed to say? You can't sleep either. Tamari shook her head gently, her hair moving with her. With all the excitement you put me through today, I know I won't be able to sleep. I was wondering whether you wanted to pass the time with me. Naruto blinked. Sure, if you want to. Tamari smiled serenely and held out 2 fingers. Choose one. Naruto frowned. What are these? Nothing that would hurt you. Warning. Lime scene. Naruto huffed at her vagueness and abruptly grabbed her index finger. Suddenly, her smile turned teasing and catching him off guard, she pulled him out of his room and smashed her lips against his. He wasted no time in returning her kiss, his arms wrapping around her waist and in her hair, pulling her flush against him. In the back of his mind, he approved her way of burning of the excitement. One of her hands was wrapped around his neck and the other was fisted in his hair, making it more of a mess than it usually was. Naruto pulled one of his hands so both of them were wrapped around her waist. He turned them around, gently slamming Tamari into the wall. Neither of them cared whether the other inhabitants of the house were awake or sleeping. Both just wanted to experience the pleasure. Naruto's left hand went down her thigh, going up the t-shirt she was wearing, and softly massaged the skin of her toned stomach. The contact of flesh spurred Tamari further, as her left leg came up to wrap around Naruto's hips, his other hand instantly going to support it. Naruto's right hand was now brushing over the underside of her thigh, and his excitement only grew when his hand wasn't stopped from exploring the naked flesh of her ass. Even though she was wearing panties, Naruto's heart soared at the amount of trust she had in him. He broke off the kiss and started sucking at her pulse point. The gasp that followed his action swelled his ego a little, and he decided that he could get a little more bolder. Tamari was doing everything she could to keep her moans and gasps as quiet as possible, but it was proving to be a difficult job. She couldn't quieten the gasp when Naruto started sucking her pulse point, and it wasn't helping at all that one of his hands was massaging her waist, occasionally brushing her braless sides. The other hand was exploring the underside of the thigh that was wrapped around his hips, squeezing her ass cheek occasionally. Not to mention, she could feel his excitement poking her on her inner thigh. She wanted some payback, but before she could act on her thoughts, the hand that was massaging her sides went up, gently grabbing her breast and squeezing it. The loud gasp that erupted from her throat would have almost woken up the other residents, had Naruto not slammed his mouth onto hers at the last second. They resumed their tongue fight, but Naruto held the advantage because of his pleasurable actions to her breast. His thumb started playing with her nipple, and it was then she decided to take action. She knew that her hands brushing his abs made him shiver, but she was looking for something even more drastic, even bolder. Her right hand came down and went right inside his lower, wrapping around his flesh and squeezing it. The effect was instantaneous. His mouth opened in a gasp, and his actions faltered for a long second, in which she seized her chance. Her tongue invaded his mouth not so gently and explored every nook and corner of it, all the while, giving him a soft hand job. She had to admit, it was very long and thick. Naruto resumed his actions, while Tamari continued hers. They knew that they were slowly breaking the physical boundaries between them, and whenever they did, they never spoke about it. They just did it. And it felt good. Suddenly, Tamari stopped her ministrations and jumped up, wrapping her legs around his waist, so Naruto's excitement was pressed into her crotch. She could see from his expression that he was barely keeping himself from slamming her into the wall and humping her then and there. Tamari. Kami. Even his voice sounded sexy right now, with all the huskiness. His hands were supporting her by her ass. Both of them were breathing heavily, their faces inches from one another. Let's go into your room, she suggested breathlessly. Naruto was all too happy to accept her suggestion, and carried her into his room, making sure to shut his door gently. He then laid her down on his bed, with him on top of her. The intimate contact they had was not yet broken. Tamari grinned like the devil. Let's burn off this excitement. She then pulled him down, engaging in another heated makeout session. Lime scene, and both of them would later admit that the night was one for the books.